The gray skies over Vienna loomed low, casting a muted pall over the grand cathedral where the ceremony was held. Isabella stood still, a porcelain figure in white, her hands trembling slightly beneath the delicate lace gloves. Beside her, Victor looked dashing in his tailored tuxedo, but his eyes remained distant, unmoved by the gravity of the vows. They stood like actors in a play, performing roles written by family tradition rather than love. The cathedral was adorned with gilded arches and flower arrangements that smelled of wealth and expectation. Guests murmured with admiration, yet no one noticed the absence of joy on the couple's faces. As the priest blessed the union, Isabella dared a glance at Victor, but his gaze was fixed on the altar, not on her. She wondered briefly if he felt as trapped as she did, or if he simply didn't care. The words "I do" came out of her mouth as if borrowed from someone else's story. When the applause came, it felt like the closing of a door. The reception was held in the Hofburg Palace, a lavish affair meant to showcase not just love, but legacy. Victor's family had spared no expense. The crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and the scent of caviar and aged wine lingered in the air. Isabella moved among the guests with practiced grace, a smile painted onto her lips. Yet, in every conversation, she felt invisible, spoken to as Victor's bride, not as herself. Victor had disappeared shortly after their arrival, leaving her to greet ambassadors and CEOs alone. Her parents, proud and gleaming, toasted their daughter's new life, unaware of the hollow feeling nesting inside her. She caught sight of Victor only once, whispering into his phone in the hallway, his back turned to her. The laughter she heard in his voice wasn't for her. She closed her eyes and remembered her mother's words. Marriage is not about love. It's about duty. And tonight, duty had won. Their honeymoon in the Swiss Alps was more of a cold retreat than a romantic escape. The chalet they stayed in was luxurious, perched against snow-covered slopes with glass walls offering panoramic views. Yet, inside, the silence was sharper than the mountain wind. Victor spent most of his days on his laptop, responding to emails, attending virtual meetings. Isabella tried to engage, suggesting they ski together or take a sleigh ride, but was met with polite declines. In the evenings, they dined together, but the conversations were surface level, strained. He asked her how she liked the food. She said it was lovely. She asked about his work. He gave her curt summaries. They slept in the same bed but felt a world apart. The mountain air was crisp, but it couldn't thaw the growing frost between them. Back in Vienna, the mansion Victor brought her to was magnificent. Sprawling gardens, tall windows, marble staircases, but it felt more like a museum than a home. Isabella wandered its halls, discovering rooms filled with untouched books, antique furniture, and echoes. Victor's routine became predictable. Early mornings, long absences, late returns. Sometimes he didn't return at all. She began to learn how to fill her time. With painting, with gardening, with reading, always alone. The housekeeper, Greta, a kindly woman in her 60s, became her only companion. Through small chats over tea, Isabella learned more about the household than Victor ever shared. Every night she waited for his footsteps. And every night she went to bed wondering why her heart felt heavier than the silk sheets around her. Weeks turned into months, and a quiet ache began to settle into Isabella's bones. Not of pain, but of absence. She began to realize that her husband, though physically present at times, had never truly arrived in their marriage. His gaze often drifted elsewhere, his smile reserved for someone beyond her understanding. She remembered their wedding night, how he had kissed her forehead and turned away. Not unkind, just distant. And that was almost worse. She had grown up reading about love, dreaming of it, believing in it. But this was something else entirely. A contract signed, a name exchanged, a life shared in form but not in spirit. One evening, she stood in front of a mirror and asked herself softly, "Is this what being married feels like?" And her silence was the answer. Ilara Novak was the kind of woman who could stop conversation just by entering a room. Her beauty was effortless, but it was her charm that truly disarmed. She and Victor had met years ago during a university lecture on European economic integration. She'd laughed at something cynical he'd said, and that laughter had marked the beginning of his obsession. Ilara was bold, unafraid to speak her mind, and always surrounded by admirers. But what Victor failed to see, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that she also calculated every move like a game of chess. She was never cruel, only selective. And Victor, with his family's name, prestige, and promise, had always been her favorite piece. She kept him close, but never too close. Enough to stir longing, never enough to satisfy it. After Victor's marriage, they had drifted apart physically, but not emotionally. He found reasons to see her. Brief meetings, gallery openings, charity events. Sometimes they didn't even talk. Just a glance was enough to relight his yearning. Ilara seemed indifferent to his new status as a husband, though she often joked about it. "How's your lovely little Duchess doing?" She'd tease, smirking into her wine. Victor would laugh, pretending her words didn't sting with truth. He convinced himself she was the one who truly understood him. He would return home to Isabella with guilt temporarily washed away by Ilara's perfume. He never told Isabella about these meetings, though she once found a red lipstick mark on his collar. When she asked, he lied with practiced ease. It was from a handshake. Victor never questioned why Ilara never initiated contact unless he had something to offer. Whether it was a business connection, an expensive dinner, or a weekend trip to Geneva, she came when summoned. But never for free. In his heart, he convinced himself this was just how she loved. She was modern, unpredictable, independent, not like Isabella, who always gave without asking for anything. What he called freedom in Ilara was simply indifference. But the illusion had become his oxygen. He needed her to feel wanted. And Ilara, sensing this, knew exactly how to keep the leash just tight enough. She never promised love, and he never asked for it. Because deep down, he knew. At home, Isabella began to feel the cracks widening. Victor's absences became more frequent, his returns more robotic. She stopped asking where he was, stopped waiting up with tea. Instead, she began to reclaim small parts of herself. Painting again, writing in journals, learning Italian for no reason other than joy. But her heart still ached. One afternoon, while dusting his study, she found a photo. Victor and Ilara on a yacht, smiling into each other like they belonged to the same world. She didn't cry. She placed the photo back exactly where she found it. That night, she looked at Victor across the dinner table and realized, he never wanted me. Not really. It was a Friday when Ilara returned. Not for love, but for opportunity. She walked into Victor's office in a crimson coat, her heels echoing on the marble, and said simply, "I've missed you." He rose from his chair too quickly, knocking over a water glass that shattered on the floor. In hindsight, it was poetic. She told him she was done running, ready to be with him, and that he no longer had to pretend with his wife. Blinded by the fantasy he had long curated, Victor didn't question why she had returned just as his family's wealth was peaking publicly. He embraced her as if she were salvation itself. Isabella, meanwhile, noticed the change immediately. Victor was suddenly present again, attentive even. But his eyes were still empty. His love, if it had ever existed, was pointed elsewhere. Ilara moved in, not officially, but frequently enough to make it real. Victor began staying at their penthouse flat downtown, telling Isabella it was for work. One morning, Isabella woke up to find his closet half empty. She made breakfast, plated it perfectly, and left it on the dining table untouched. The house, though still large, felt even more hollow. Greta, the housekeeper, began showing her quiet sympathy. A touch on the shoulder, a cup of tea brought without being asked. Isabella said nothing. Words had stopped meaning anything between them. In the evening, she sat alone on the veranda, watching the sky turn purple and then black. She thought about leaving, not in anger, but in quiet acceptance. A marriage that never was didn't need a dramatic ending. The day the divorce papers came, Victor wasn't home. They were delivered by courier, beige envelope signed by her and notarized. Isabella left it on his desk and went for a walk in the garden. When he returned, he didn't open them immediately. He poured himself a drink instead, as if bracing for something heavier than loss. Ilara was on the couch, thumbing through a fashion catalog. "She'll survive," she said without looking up. But for the first time, Victor wasn't sure. He opened the envelope and read her short letter. "I gave you everything I had, even when I had nothing." It felt like a blade slipped quietly between the ribs. Living with Ilara turned out to be vastly different from dreaming about her. Her affection was fleeting. Her criticisms were frequent. She spent freely, dined extravagantly, and hosted parties that Victor no longer enjoyed. When his father's business suffered a sudden financial blow, Ilara's interest began to fade. She didn't bother hiding it. One evening, after a terse argument over money, she left. No note, no goodbye. Victor called her phone 23 times. She answered once, saying, "I never promised you forever." He sat in silence for hours afterward, her words clanging like broken bells. The mansion that had once echoed with opulence now whispered emptiness. Victor returned to rooms that seemed colder, light that dimmed earlier than before. He passed Isabella's old piano and touched its keys, only to remember he had never once heard her play. He looked at the garden and saw how it had overgrown. Isabella's last act of care, now wilting. He searched his drawers and found her journals. He read them page by page until dawn. In them, she never once cursed him, only loved him. Even when she was breaking. Especially then. Isabella moved to Amalfi, renting a small cottage overlooking the sea. She taught art to children at a local school and spent her weekends painting sunrises from her balcony. Life became simple, peaceful. She met a man named Tommaso, a widower who ran the town library. They shared stories over cappuccinos, walked the coastline at dusk, and never spoke of the past unless it offered healing. Isabella smiled again, not out of politeness, but from joy. Her heart, once bruised and discarded, was blooming like a forgotten flower finding sunlight again. She never spoke of Victor. She no longer needed to.
Meanwhile, Victor stayed in Vienna. He attended social gatherings but found no real conversation. His name still held weight, but his soul felt light, dangerously so. Some nights, he walked the halls of the mansion alone, stopping outside her room. He kept her letter folded in his wallet. Sometimes, he read it again under moonlight, just to feel something. He imagined her laugh, her soft touch, her quiet strength. He thought he could replace her. But some people are not replaceable. And the cost of realizing